Rob, do you want to introduce our wonderful guest for this evening?
I absolutely will do that. So, losing faith for a person born into the LDS Church, also known as the Mormons, which they apparently don't like that anymore, has been compared to a death by 1,000 cuts. Stephanie's family has roots in the early years of the church, and she's one of the few members of her family who has officially removed her name from church records. Her journey from a true Blue Mormon to a full atheist spans 35 years of small cuts and cracks to her former faith. She's relied on her sense of humor and optimism to make it through. So tonight she's joining us to talk about some Mormon fan fiction. And I'm actually going to put a link for her previous talk, which was all about the Mormon faith, in the chat right now. Welcome, Stephanie.
Hello, guys. This
Yay!
is
Hi,
awesome.
Stephanie. Welcome to RfRx again. And
Yes.
I'm so excited about this talk because, they mentioned this, I think, in your last talk, and I was like, oh my God, I want to know about weird Mormon fan fiction and stuff. So I'm very excited for this evening. So I'm very interested in what you have to say. So this will be humorous and also enlightening. So I think I'm hoping this won't be like some of our other talks, like, oh, now I'm sad. I'm hoping for some bittersweetness. So
Yeah, no, there will definitely be a lot of laughter because there's lots to laugh at on this one. Yeah, and this is by popular demand. I did not expect that section when I was proving my credentials as a true Blue Mormon would become a big deal. So I'm hoping that this turns into its own little series. I'm never going to be able to touch Rob on like how many talks I'm
No,
doing.
David. David's got
David's
Yeah,
the
or
pinnacle.
David. I can't even imagine like I'm nowhere near David's status. So I'm at least, you know, Rob's possibly attainable, but even then. But yeah, so this is we're going to be focusing on 10 issues among the Nephites, which is this one. I am not crazy. I did get this from a library. I'm not willing to give the church or this guy any more of my money. So yeah, this is a library copy that I've been digging from. Um, and yeah, so there is for the majority of you, I'm assuming that people didn't go out and get their own copy because it was going to be that great of a book and you have to read it, so don't feel bad. But I do want to go through a quick summary of the book so that everybody can kind of keep up on what this craziness is about, for lack of a better word. So, but first, I want to kind of lay a bit of history down and kind of get you into the mindset of when this book was written so that you understand why the author wrote it the way that he did. Because if you were to go to like a kid or even a teenager currently being raised in the church, they're getting totally different messaging than what I was given about 30, 25, 20 years ago. Um, so they would look at a lot of this book as, okay, well, this is just fiction. They wouldn't understand it like I did, where this guy is believing this is history and that this is more of a historical novel that he's writing. So, um, yeah, basically, the Book of Mormon is part of the foundation of my childhood and some of my adult life. Church leaders who had the label or title of prophet said that it would give you the power to resist temptation and avoid deception. They said it could also immunize you against the quote evils of the day, including addiction. Gordon Hinckley at the time was the leader of the church during my teenage years. And he promised that if we prayerfully read and studied the Book of Mormon, we would have more of a spirit of God, a stronger resolution to obey his commandments, and a stronger testimony of Jesus. So it was that big of a deal, even back then. These days, the church leaders are trying to distance themselves from the idea that the book is a literal history of the people in it. On the church's website, if you were to go there right now, one of their gospel topic essays says the primary purpose of the Book of Mormon is more spiritual than historical. However, back in 1995, the church was still teaching that it's a literal ancient history. They would point to things like the literature around Quetzalcoatl, who's described as a white bearded god who descended out of the heavens as an example of proof. And for those who aren't aware, Quetzalcoatl, and I'm butchering that name, he was one of the people that was worshipped by, I want to say, the Aztecs. Yeah. And so they would point at examples like that they found in other literature to show that it was a historical, literal, like actual history of as far as this book went. Um, Joseph Smith himself, the guy who supposedly translated it into English, also said it's a literal history. So, for example, the introduction page of my 1991 edition of the Book of Mormon says all people chronicled in the book were destroyed except the Lamanites, and they are the principal, and this is quoting, they were destroyed except the Lamanites, and they are the principal ancestors of the American Indians, end quote. The new introduction page of the 2006 versions says the Lamanites are among the ancestors of the American Indians. So they want to believe that it's still possible that there are some that are ancestors um, that have ancestry of the Lamanites, but they're distancing themselves from saying it's all of them, and that's exactly where all the Native Americans came from, which is kind of fun. And they're doing that because there's been so much history, or not history, so much research into like the DNA, the archaeology, all of these facts that are running counter to what has been claimed on this book so far. And they're knowing how silly they're sounding, so they're trying to put a lot of space between those claims. As far as 10 issues among the Nephites go, many parts of the book read like paragraphs that were stolen from an article in The New Era. That was a magazine that was written for teenagers of the Mormon Church, one that I had a subscription to. And the first book in the series, this one in particular, had those teenagers in mind for its audience. So just to kind of clarify, all of this background as far as what the church currently teaches, what it did teach, this is it was in this older, like in the late 80s, 90s. This is the mentality that the author, Chris Heiberdiger, was in when he decided he wanted to write this series. The first one that I'm going to go over, that is 10 Issues Among the Nephites, it was published in 1989. And he's quoted as saying he wanted to present a fictional account of the Book of Mormon from both a spiritual and a scholarly standpoint and tie it all together in a wonderful adventure. That's how he puts it in the biography at the end of the book. And as just another weird little tidbit, also in the bio at the end of the book, it gives when he and his wife were married in the temple, because that's how bios for Mormon books go. It's special. So now that we've got all the background on this book covered, I'm going to go into an actual summary of what I've been painfully rereading. So it starts with the narrator himself is Jamie. Jim. He insists on going by Jim because Jamie is too girly. So Jim is a 13-year-old boy who's very bored by Cody, Wyoming, which is a small town that he lives in. He's trying to maneuver through peer pressure, family relationships, and the religious studies that are part of his everyday life. And then you've got Garth Plimpton. Garth is a nerd, like hardcore nerd. He's the boy who has all of the answers in the religious classes. He's full on invested in the religion itself. And I'm not talking about nerd that is like the cool nerd that we've got today. I'm talking, this is the kid who was seriously bullied. In fact, Jim is one of the boys who are bullying Garth until Jim becomes something of an outcast himself, because there's a couple things that happen and he won't bend to the peer pressure of his so-called friends. So when he finally decides he's when Jim finally decides he's done with these friends of his, shortly after, Garth tells Jim he's found an ancient mural. Sorry, can't talk today. But he finds these ancient paintings on the bank of a nearby river. And the scene shows people running into a hole in the riverbank. And Jim realizes that this particular hole is known as Frost Cave, and he thinks that it may have answers to the scene on this painting of people running away. So they go back out the next day. Jim and Garth aim to just explore the cave. Jim's little sister, Jenny, tags along without Jim's permission. And Jenny's actually the one that discovers a passageway that leads to what they call the Rainbow Room. It's this huge cavern with phosphorescent walls and waterfalls. Very beautiful. And when I was a teenager, when I was a kid, this is a really cool place that I wanted to be real. I wanted to go visit one day. So that's another thing I'll never get to do because it's all made up. But when Jenny falls into the stream, Jim instinctively plunges in after her, and Garth follows. They end up riding this underground river, and they wake up on the bank of a lake and soon discover they're in an ancient world inhabited by the Nephites. And these are people that they've studied their whole lives. Also, I want to go back to it. So for people who aren't familiar with the stories in this, basically you've got two major groups of people. Kind of like two countries. You've got the Nephites, you've got the Lamanites. Generally, the Nephites are made out to be the good guys, the Lamanites are made out to be the bad guys. And each of those groups has different clans among them. So if you hear me say another name like Ammonites, those are like the clan of Ammon's people. And so they have their own names, but they typically fall under either Nephites or Lamanites, just to kind of keep it simple. So back to the story. Jim and Garth and Jenny all discover they have the gift of tongues, meaning they can understand any language and everyone can understand them when they speak. They're amazed and only slightly worried until members of Amalickiah's followers capture them. Amalickiah is one of the villains of the Book of Mormon. Jenny's pale skin and blonde hair make her a valuable gift to Amalickiah from their captors, and she's immediately made part of his harem. Jim has really dark hair, and Garth has kind of like an auburn, so they have really light skin, but they're not as like big of a prize as Jenny is. So she's kept captive, and Amalickiah
This feels racist.
Oh yeah, just wait.
This sounds really racist. So
I haven't even pointed out like the skin
Sorry.
differences that they definitely go over in the book.
Just what you're saying, I was like, oh, this is not going to go well. Anyway, keep going.
So, yeah, the Amalickiah and his followers are not white and delightsome in the scriptures. It's great. But Amalickiah tries to win Jim and Garth over. He says he's convinced people to leave the evil and abusive Nephite rulers to become his people. And at first you can kind of believe this because in parts of the Book of Mormon, the Lamanites become the good guys. And the Nephites are the ones that fall away from the church teachings and become the bad guys. So it's been a while since I've read both the Book of Mormon and this particular book. And I totally forget the actual stories, and what Amalickiah is actually saying is making kind of sense to me. But fortunately, we've got Garth in the book, who's the ultra Book of Mormon nerd and knows all the details right off the top of his head. So Garth calls him out based on details from the Book of Mormon and details the 3 betrayals that Amalickiah did that landed him the current throne. So Amalickiah freaks out, goes off, says this is all heresy, this is blasphemy, and sentences them to be sacrificed to the sun god. Their original captor has a change of heart, helps them early the next morning to escape, but he dies in the process. And they wind up in the presence of this guy called Captain Tiancum. We can go over his name later. There's a whole bunch of jokes just on his name alone. And he's one of the big heroes of the Book of Mormon. So Garth is losing his mind. Jim is kind of realizing what's going on by meeting this guy. And Tiancum basically takes them the rest away, but he refuses to go back to rescue Jenny because it's too dangerous. So Tiancum at the time was on his way to the Nephite city, the capital city rather, called Zarahemla. He decides to take the boys with him to this meeting that he was going to attend with other famous Book of Mormon heroes, including this guy called Helaman. He's the current prophet of the time. He's the one God talks with. And they mean that very literally. So this is a huge deal. The boys are trying not to freak out, Garth especially, and they learn that part of the reason that Amalickiah was able to convince so many people to leave the Nephites is because the Nephites are currently this big melting pot. They have all these cultural and language differences between individual kinships or clans. They refer to them as kinships. And so it's really easy to break a wedge in all of those differences and get some people to go a different direction. So the Nephite leaders at the time in this meeting are preparing to fight Amalickiah and his armies. Jim and Garth agree to become interpreters because they can understand and speak to everybody and are able to bridge this gap to make sure that there's no option for dissension and all of the armies are able to understand everybody as they give instructions.
Is Garth a nerd?
Oh, he's hardcore nerd. Yep.
Okay, cool. All right. Got it.
Yeah. And he's one of those kids that has a bunch of freckles, so they keep referring to him as the marked one, the spotted one. It's really funny. All the nicknames that the Nephites, Lamanites refer to him as. Because they're not used to freckles. I don't know. For some reason, nobody knows freckles. And also, I forgot to mention, this takes place 67 BC, and I have that number because if you look up the characters that are talking about in the Book of Mormon, one of the cool things of this book is it actually tells you at the bottom what year it about is. You get a rough idea. It's really kind of funny how Joseph Smith did that. But
For people who are live on the session, the Wikipedia article actually has a list of all the characters, so you can open that up.
Perfect.
Good. I need to read along.
Yeah,
And
there's
for people who are watching
I
this,
need help.
for people who are reading this in the future, it's the page in Wikipedia's tennis shoes adventure series. And
I didn't even.
Oh yeah,
know
there's a whole list of. There's a lot of
Wikipedia.
protagonists.
Yeah.
And
so yeah, you
antagonists.
can follow along with that. I should have even thought of that.
So again, so this was fan fiction written as that was also considered historical part of the Mormon mythology.
So he has a lot of liberties.
Okay.
Yeah, he takes a lot of liberty with the setting. He says that he tried to go work with actual historians who know the Central American area to put a lot of the details in place. And he does describe what it's like when they're walking up to Zarahemla and they notice, oh, here's how the merchants are behaving. Oh, here's how people with their farms are behaving. Here's where people are keeping their huts. Things like that. He does put in a lot of those kind of details, which is interesting. But there are a lot of other historical inaccuracies that he puts in because we've all been told that these are facts historically. And I have some examples that I can point out further on that are kind of fun when you do something.
So when you say he puts historical facts in, you mean historical facts as related in the Book of Mormon?
No, as we're taught at church. So for one example, it's when Garth and Jim are traveling with Tiancum and his little group, Tiancum has a special treat for a drink, and he brings out these cocoa beans. And Jim gets super excited. He's like, oh, hot cocoa. Yes, this is going to be great. And the cup gets passed around, and everyone's like, oh, this is so good. And it gets to Jim, and he tastes it and he spits it back out. He's like, "This is so bitter. Don't you have any sugar?" And Garth kind of starts laughing at him. But later, when he's at like Tiankum's village, his wife makes the same drink, but it says, in fact, I'm gonna go down to it because it's so freaking funny to me. Yeah, it lists some of the other food that this is Tiankum's mother is giving out, and it says that one of the other villagers' family keeps bees, and so they had honey. And so this time when Jim gets the hot cocoa, he puts a big glob of honey into his cup and stirs it around. But the funny part, in the Americas, there was a very, very, very ancient bee, but by the time this story happened, it has been extinct for a long time. And we don't have bees in the Americas until they get brought over by Europeans. And that's not until like 1500s. I've got the link somewhere with the numbers. But yeah, so details like that. So he has things like the cocoa bean and corn and some things like that. But then he throws in things like honey, because we were raised in the church that honey was definitely in the Americas because it shows up in the Book of Mormon as something that people eat. So little details like that. Some of it's stuff that we were raised by the church to believe. Some of it he went to actual historians for the details. And it's kind of fun figuring out where the line is. So let's see, back on the story itself. Where'd I stop? Here we go. Okay, so Jim and Garth have agreed, yeah, we'll go ahead and be your interpreters to kind of make it easy to fight against the Lamanites. And so they go back with Tiankum to his village. And as they're kind of hanging out there, this is the fun part. So I know that Helen, you and Kara were wanting to know about relationships that get built, like romantic relationships that might get built in some of these stories. This one has one. So
Oh,
yeah,
good. I need some romance, especially
I
Mormon
was
romance.
so excited. I was so
Yeah,
excited
I'm like,
that you didn't get this part.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Let me go get a fan because it's going to get hot. I'm sure.
Oh yeah, as hot as it will get for
Yeah.
teenage Mormons, as hot as it's allowed to get. And like perfect Mormon tradition, Jim goes to a fireside, which is what we used to call like talks that were given, sometimes to the adults, sometimes to youth. But they were always called fireside, where you had a guest speaker, you'd go into the church and you'd hear their talk. So this was often a time that you were recommended to bring a date, especially if they weren't a member, so that you could, flirt to convert, basically. So true Mormon tradition, they're at this meeting, it's at night, so of course there's a big bonfire, and it specifies that they go to the fireside with the way he writes it in the book. So really made me laugh. But in the meantime, he's there and he sees this really, really, really cute girl, super long dark hair, and keeps like catching himself staring at her because she's so pretty. And he also realizes she keeps staring at him and she's pretending not to, and they play this I'm not looking game. It's really, really funny. But she gets up to leave and he does the awkward boy thing where he also gets up, makes an excuse, oh, where's the extra firewood? They might need some more. And then goes to follow this girl. Tries to get smooth, doesn't work. But yeah, there's a bit of a little romance there, and I can go into more details there for sure.
Oh,
I will
love
not.
blossoming.
I won't leave you hanging. I won't leave you hanging on that. But yeah, so this girl, it turns out this is one of Tiankum's nieces. So he learns that her name is Minochin.
So this is part of the same book.
Yeah, same book.
This is the same book.
This is all in this book.
Okay, yep. All right. I just want to make sure. Like, I know you're talking about that one book, but I just want to make sure because we were on one track and now we're over here. So
yeah, yeah. So this is like kind of the halfway point in this book.
Okay.
And it's a super easy read. In fact, the text I think is like 20 point high. It's really big text. So, um, and he learns that this girl is his age. She's also 13, and that in this culture, most people marry by the time they're 15 years old. And he left because he's like, we're not even allowed to date until we're 16. So this whole idea just blows his mind. And so Jim considers a life with Menochin if he can't make his way back home. And she gives him a ring as a symbol of her love for him. It's super adorable. So shortly after, Jim and Garth uncover a plot that's hatched by dissenters to kill the Tiancum and the other major Nephite leaders. They are sent, they're supposed to just be going back to Zarahemla to meet up with somebody else. Oh, that's what it is. They go and they talk with Helaman, the prophet, for a little while. So after they're done talking with Helaman, they go back and the guy that was escorting them there is gone. And then they end up figuring out where he's went, and that's when they find out that there's this plot to kill the 7 Nephite leaders who were all at this meeting earlier in the day. So they manage to stop it, and then the 2 of them part ways to serve 2 of the groups of the military. Jim goes with Tiancum to the larger part of the army that's leaving first. Garth stays with the other half, who thinks that they've still got time to go and support them later. So things go really bad when they first have this battle. Jim experiences all of the horrors of war in one day, and he's also there when Tiancum sees after this first battle that Tiancum's son has been killed in the battle. And then Tiancum, because everything is just going and he doesn't have a chance to stop because he's the big captain, he's the big man in charge, he just moves on to prepare for the next battle. But Tiancum has this idea that Amalekiah's army will fall apart if their leader is killed on the first day of the new year, which is the next day. So he comes up with a plan where he's just going to sneak into the camp and he won't let anybody go with him. But Jim convinces him, I need to go with you. If there's a chance my sister is there with the rest of his harem that he's brought with him, I need to try and save her, and I need you to promise that you'll help me do that. So Tiancum agrees, and they manage to slip into Amalekiah's camp unseen in a sandstorm, and they attribute the sandstorm to God is protecting us. That's why we're able to get away with this and sneak in. So that's one of the fun parts. Tiancum does sneak in, he kills Amalekiah, and Jim manages to rescue Jenny. So the next day, Amalekiah's army is in absolute chaos, just like Tiancum predicted, but Amalekiah's brother takes over as king and begins the process of building the army back together. Garth and the other half of those armies, they show up. So Jim and Garth and Jenny are all reunited. All 3 of them then get summoned to the camp where Helaman's staying, the prophet. So he says that God has revealed to him that Jim, Garth, and Jenny were sent to this land to prepare them for a future as religious leaders at the end times of their own lives. So he basically says they're going to be huge deals just before Jesus shows back up for a second coming. And so he sent them to the past to get them ready for that life. Helen says,
sure.
well, I know it's nuts, but yeah. So they've been changed while they've been staying with the Nephites, and those changes are going to stay. But he says if they talk about anything that happened, they can talk about it, but they'll immediately lose their memory about what happened. So they do.
Wait, hold on. Wait. Hold on. So they'll know it, but they can't. If they talk about it, even with each other, though they all experience the exact same thing.
Yep.
They will lose their memory.
Yeah, so like
that
Jim and
that makes
Garth are
sense.
like yeah, so like later Jim and Garth are kind of looking at each other like, yeah, you know, oh yeah, I know, but they don't talk about it. Jenny, on the other hand, so oh, by the way, Helaman also says God also showed me how to get you guys back home and walks them to this cave, and they end up eventually realizing that some way through the cave turns back into the Frost Cave where they originally found their place. Um, and so they do get home, all because God told his prophet how. I don't know. But so
I'm
yeah, when they do get back
I'm
home,
trying to make sense out of God rules and I'm failing. But it's God rules. So
it's God rules.
apparently it's God
Yeah.
rules. It's just like, just stop, Helen. You're trying to make it make sense and it doesn't.
But you don't have a
Exactly.
problem with the different things they keep inventing that the sonic screwdriver can do, huh?
Yeah, because I know that that's fiction.
I'm not supposed to actually believe in the doctor and make it like, worship the doctor, where
Oh,
like
excuse
it's like
me. It
and
actually
the
has
doctor
sounded
is
like you're
not
mentioning.
supposed to save my salvation unless it's Tenant.
That Tenet can all day long, but not the rest.
Yes, I'm biased, everybody. I'm so biased. But like, so just about a pause. So how old are Jim, Garth, and Jenny?
So Jim and Garth are both 13. Jenny's a couple years younger. She's 11, which
Oh,
is really fun. Yeah, and my oldest is
Oh.
11. So like anytime this stuff was going on, I would imagine like my two kids who were 10 and 11 years old and then like a little older. And so yeah, it's kind of crazy.
What? Because wow, because I
Yeah.
was thinking like mid-teens, like 15,
No.
16, and now that you mentioned this, like junior high school kids,
Yeah.
like
They're like,
and they're being like, God's little soldiers kind of shit. Like I'm like, oh, okay,
yep.
sure, let an 11-year-old do like
And
get
by
all
the
this
way,
responsibility.
that also means that both of the boys are priesthood holders and have
At
that kind of
13?
power. Oh, they start at 12.
What?
They don't have
Have you
all
met
of
a
it, but they
13-year-old
start.
boy?
I know. Oh, I know. I know. There's a whole bunch that is just crazy. But yeah,
Wait,
so
wait. So
And I don't want to
does
hear. When was
does
this
that
written?
reflect Mormon reality that
Yeah.
young kids that people that young, kids that young can hold the priesthood?
yeah. In fact, right now, so my 11-year-old turns 12 in July, and the teenage, like the youth groups, they're the young men's group. They've got young men's and young women's. But the young men leaders have started to invite my 11-year-old to their weekly activities. And so they're basically trying to court him to get him primed for when he turns 12 and then gets the priesthood. But
So yeah,
thankfully,
like
he started to really question the church because of all these other seeds that I planted, made it so that he's comfortable doing so. So it'll be interesting to see what he does. He probably will just to keep his mom happy, but as far as believing in all of it, we'll see if he actually does by then. It's going to be interesting.
because like somebody posted in the chat that that 11-year-old boys can receive a priesthood, which like
Yeah, it's once you hit
I've
12.
had an 11-year-old. I've been around 11-year-old boys. I cannot imagine like an 11-year-old boy like being like the prophet or like leader of a church, like even getting them to be a leader of like their own little kid gang. It's like really. So it just, but again, I do not know the wisdom of the Mormon elders, so I'm just gonna sit back
And also
go,
you're female,
sure.
so what do you know?
Exactly. Well, I'm also a female, so
But
probably
yeah, so,
11. Probably in the Mormon Church, a 11-year-old boy has more authority than my womanly 46-year-old's ass, which I'm pretty sure that's.
yep. I
Yep,
have
there we
seen
go,
them
everybody.
hold it over your head. It's
Yep.
so stupid. But yeah, there have been a couple times in my life where that's happened, and I have restrained myself from slapping a dumb child. Like, yeah.
All right. So just so I mean, like, I feel like that I shouldn't have to say this, but I'm going to say it, like 11-year-olds should not be in charge of anything. Maybe a bake sale. That's
I was aghast when I was talking to somebody who had left Jehovah's Witnesses, and they were talking about when they were like that age, they were going door to door with an adult. And I said, well, you just hung in the background, right? No, I was the one
No.
preaching to the people who opened the door. It's like, I would have just laughed in your face, kid. It's
Yeah,
like,
the JWs, they
sorry.
take it to an even higher extreme than Mormons do. So that that makes me glad I at least wasn't in a Jehovah's Witness family, because
I
that would
love
have been
that
even
you're
more
part of a
annoying.
cult. You're like, I was part of a bad cult, but not that bad.
Like they're and I was like, my mom was more lax, especially as a teenager. She really took like a rebellious stage. She would go
8
back
years
and
old.
forth. But yeah, like 14, 15-year-old to me, like totally was with the idea that the teenage boys my age had this power, and as long as they were worthy, then they could do what they were doing.
So there we go. Somebody
wild.
just verified that in the chat, saying I'm an XJW, and Rob is right. I ran to the door up front as an 8-year-old. Just
It,
oh my
That's
God.
wild.
I like so. Like I'm just wondering this, not just for Jehovah's Witness, but also for the Mormon Church, is the idea that if it's like an out of the mouths of babes sort of thing, like if a child is preaching it, it can seem like wisdom for so people will be like, oh, this little kid knows it, so it must be true.
Well,
Like I don't like I'm curious like what the motivator of that is.
part of it's all the indoctrination. It starts extremely young, like with the toddlers that are in kind of like the daycare while everyone else is in Sunday school. The toddlers are taught all of the stuff about church. As soon as they can, they get indoctrinated. And so yeah, it's if a little kid in like the primary classes who's like 6 all the way through 11 or so, if they start talking about scriptures to you, the adults are like, oh good, they get it, they understand, like the spirit is touching their hearts and is helping them understand all this stuff. So yeah, they're not surprised if a little kid is saying something that is a church teaching. If they're trying to make a prophecy, they're not buying into it unless it's being taught by the actual church leaders that are much higher up. But yeah, it's not a big deal if a little kid teaches a lesson to adults, as long as it's, something that they've also been taught is part of the doctrine or comes from the scriptures or stuff like that. It's really wild, which is why I didn't think anything of it as a kid. Like, just how you were raised.
Well, I mean, like like Rob and I grew up Catholic, and when you're in it, you're not realizing how kind of screwed up it is until you kind of get away from it. You have the distance, and you're like, oh, well,
Yeah.
oh yeah,
That's a fun moment.
Oh yeah. Like I'm not saying that the Catholic Church doesn't have its own fucked up shit, because it does. But it is very interesting because yes, there's indoctrination of children within the Catholic Church, but there isn't a whole lot of taking children and saying they're prophets. Having go out and witness to other people about, the doctrines of the church or anything like that. You might see a little bit within church services, but even still, they don't expect children to go out and proselytize, because that's the priest's job. And they're supposed to save kids from original sin. So the fact that, in the Mormon church, that there's young children, 11-year-olds being able to do this huge responsibility of being in charge of, so are they in charge of other children, or is it also within the priesthood they can be in charge of adults and proselytize to them and interpret the book? I'm curious how this works. I'm not Mormon, so I don't know.
Yeah, so they're not really in charge of other people. They're just given this power as they go, and it's like a gradual you get some of the priesthood at this age, you get another piece of it added at this age, you get the rest added at this age. So by the time a boy turns 18, once he turns 18, then he gets the full total priesthood, everything that a priesthood holder can do, they can now do. And they do that because now you can go on your mission. So that's another whole fun thing. But yeah, like they can't, like a 12-year-old boy doesn't have as much priesthood authority as a grown man would. But he still has more than his older sister or his mom. So there's still a power dynamic there, which is kind of messed up. So that's a blast.
I'm sorry. I know like we're supposed to be doing the fan fiction stuff, but this took me on a different road because I was like, how does this work?
Yeah, it's great.
And I want to understand like how old are these characters? And you're like, oh, they're 11 and 13 years old. And I'm like, because I'm thinking at least like mid-teens, like 16, 17. I was like, they're not adults, but you know, they're heading that way. You know, like not that I want a 16-year-old to be in charge of anything, but like at least I was
So now I think the writers of The Expanse, which is again what's behind me, set 200 years from now when mankind has colonized other places in the solar system, and there's this giant Mormon subplot. They did not show any kids in charge of anything, so at least in 200 years they get, you know, more reasonable.
Probably change that a bit. That's a relief.
Yeah. It was all adults, and by the way, 200 years from now, when all the other clothing styles have changed, the Mormons are still wearing white shirt and tie.
That's beautiful.
It is a classic look. I mean, like, are you going to argue with a white shirt and tie?
Oh no, trust me. Apparently, yeah.
Those things that will never go out of style.
If you wear like a colored button-up shirt, even like if it's a certain shade darker than like a lighter blue, some guys get away with a lighter blue, but like there's a big joke that depending on the color of your shirt, someone will assume if you're like apostate material, if you're on your way out. It's really, it's wild. So
you only get do you only get like white, beige, and light blue, and then anything outside of that's like, listen, I'm like, you're gonna be you might be
if you wear pink, you're definitely on the way.
Oh yeah, you wear pink, it's like, oh my gosh,
oh well,
so
you're
funny.
gonna I mean, you're gonna be part of the queer community if you wear pink. Like it's just gonna be bad. So
it's gonna happen. Don't wear pink.
I
mean, I wouldn't wear pink. I just don't like pink, but that's me. Like, so I never had that problem.
Hey, again, this is just like silly, like religion's full of silly rules. Like every religion is a bunch of silly rules, and I just love it's just like nope. If you wear anything outside of white, beige, and light blue, you're an apostate and not a real Mormon. Fuck you.
Yeah, it's the wildest thing. And I keep finding out about my own culture. I'm like, I didn't know that was a big deal. Like,
okay, so please continue on with the weird fan fiction. I know, I'm sorry, we're doing these weird tangents, but it's making my brain ask questions that I didn't know I wanted answers to.
This is why we have to do this as a series, because the only way we're going to get to all the questions is by doing Book of Mormon, like, book club series. Like we got to do Mormon book club series in order to get all those questions. It's gonna be great. But yeah, so very end of the book, that all three of the kids get back home. Jim is convinced it's been 2 months since they left because they've spent 2 months in the ancient lands. So he's like, it's actually kind of nice and warm for a November day. And his bike hasn't rusted that they've left by the trail as they left. And they get home, it's super late at night, and like he wakes up to his mom like slamming open his door and saying, when did you and your sister finally get home last night? Like, why didn't you tell me when you were leaving? We sent everybody out to look for you. And he's like, okay, yeah, she's freaked out, but she's not that freaked out as if I've been gone for 2 months. So what the heck? Because he makes a joke about like, oh no, aliens abducted us, is the excuse that he gives. And she gets mad at him because she's thinking that he's like being sassy with her. And he's like, wait, she didn't get mad at me as I'm glad you're back home. It's been, I was so worried and terrified that something really bad had happened. 2 months kind of angry. So that's when he realizes it's only been one day and it's still September when they left. So yeah, that was kind of a funny part. But he also learns that Jenny has been like teasing one of her friends, like, I've got a secret. And her friend is like, finally gets it out of her. And Jenny still spells the entire story and told like her friend, yeah, I've even got this dress that I wore and it's in my dresser. And so the next day, her friend comes over to see the dress. And Jenny's like, what dress? What are you talking about? No memory of the whole thing on her end. So the like Jim and Garth see this and they're like, we're not telling anybody because they don't want to lose it. And Jim decides he's going to write down a manuscript about the adventure, which is the book, and that's why it's written from his point of view, like as first person. But later, after he writes down the story, he has no memory of the adventure or writing the book. So he thinks later on that his grandma wrote it, and that's the only way it exists. So in the meantime, he still has that ring that Menochin gave him. He doesn't know where it came from, but like years later, like as he's coming back from his mission when he's like 21, he still has the ring and he knows it's important, but he has no clue why it's there. So, and then the book ends. So, absolutely bonkers. But yeah, it was painted as historical fiction in a way and just geared towards teenagers. So let's see here. I haven't looked at the chat yet, but I do want to make sure that you get the whole Menochin thing with the whole romance because that was one of the funniest parts to me. But yeah, so they do the whole like, I'm not looking at you, you're not looking at me, flirting kind of thing. And when he goes out from the fireside to follow her, she gets called by her mom, hey, your two younger siblings are messing with the other visitor. They're her like 6 and 7-year-old kids are picking on Garth and he's just trying to be extra patient. So Minocha gets called back by her mom to go and wrangle in the younger ones. And they all go and Jim follows the three to Minochin's home and is still trying to be smooth about the whole thing and failing miserably. And Minochin is kind of doing that, I'm not interested, but just before she walks into her house, he catches her having this great big smile on her face, and he's like, oh, she likes me, or maybe it's a, I can't believe that guy tried talking to me smile. Like, he's so confused on which it is. But yeah, later they meet again, and she's like, no, I really like you too. And they both are imagining what it'd be like to be married to each other and everything. And one of my favorite moments that is also where it seems like they ripped the stuff straight out of one of those magazines that is using the language from the people in charge of the church telling the teenagers how to behave. I gotta read this part to you because it's super cringy now. But it's one of the big romance moments. So it's Jim saying that he dreamed about Menochin. He says, strangely in my dream, I was back in Cody, Wyoming. Menochin was with me. I was taking her out on a date just as a friend because, you know, they're only 13 and he can't date until they're 16. He says, I wanted to go to the movies, but I was worried. Menochin had never seen one before, and I didn't want to offend her with some gory horror film. Fortunately, E.T. the Extraterrestrial was playing at the Cody Theater.
Wait, this is set in the 80s?
What?
I told you, it was printed in 1989, so yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. But I didn't think it was set in the 80s. I thought it was like set in like 1880.
Set way back. And it's
Rob,
really
what year
funny
did you think it was set in?
I'm confused.
He's dreaming. He's dreaming like
I'm just very confused. Okay,
yeah.
so
Okay, wait.
wait a
Jim-
minute. Are
Jim
you
is
saying
asleep.
E.T.
Okay,
was
wait.
a
Hold
film?
on. So he's dreaming about going on a date?
Yeah, he's dreaming like when he's still like he's sleeping in the hut of Tiankum's family. And
Okay.
he's talking about a dream that he has that night, like after he's met Minochin and
Oh, okay.
everything.
All right. All right. I know you said
So-
it, but I'm just trying to make so this
Yeah,
is all
so
very
this is like his little
convoluted and
fantasy.
weird.
And did I hear that you were categorizing ET as a horror film?
That's what he says. No. He says he didn't
To be
want
fair,
to. He didn't
to
want
my
to
5-year-old
offend
self,
her. Yeah, he
6-year-old
didn't.
self, I saw ET and it was a horror film when I was a small child. So
So,
I
yeah,
agree.
so he says that he doesn't want to take her to some gory horror film because he doesn't want to get her offended by like taking her to that kind of a movie.
What if she
So,
likes horror?
no. She definitely makes it clear, like her attitudes are also definitely the purity culture attitudes.
Oh,
like,
okay, yeah, we
foisted
can't.
on her by the author. It's super
No
bad.
poltergeist for you.
Yeah, so he remembers that this movie is playing at the local theater. So he says, next thing I remember, we were inside. The movie was starting. And then he says that two of the guys from his old friend list, who were the bullies, says those two were sitting behind us. They're pointing at Minochin's clothes and laughing. I threatened them. They started throwing popcorn into Minochin's long black hair. We were a couple of minutes into the movie. It was a seat around the table. They were playing games. And despite the popcorn, Minochin was watching the story with great interest. One of the characters on screen said a cuss word and did something sort of crude. Nothing major, I thought, but Minochin started to cry. She got up and pushed her way through everybody's legs, clumsily, because her hands were covering her eyes. I followed her. Everybody in the theater was throwing popcorn at us. It looked like a blizzard. When we got outside, she asked me how I could watch such vulgar things. I was speechless. Mrs. Tiancum rescued me from my dream with an awakening call. So, yeah, something in E.T. was crude and vulgar enough to make this poor little Nephite girl cry. And it just was.
Well, to be fair,
Yeah.
I mean, like, it is super sad. Like,
It is.
like I remember certain parts of ET and I get it. So if she was crying, I support that because she was having emotional reaction to a movie, and I think that's great. So
Yeah, but it was
know.
like her freaking out because there was a swear word in a movie.
Wow, somebody
And
just
she's
wrote in
Oh
like
the
a
my
chat.
fucking
13-year-old
God,
girl.
really?
Yeah, that's
Somebody
what
wrote in
made
the
her
chat
cry.
that the movie was evil and the devil would possess my family if we watched it. What the hell?
So they understand. Yeah. Oh, there's also another moment with Minochin. Because remember how I said Jim hates his name as Jamie because it's too girly? So he ends up changing his mind because of a cute girl. So this part, like, this is when he's first meeting Minochin, and she's like, so your name is Jim. And he says the way she said Jim was so sharp and crisp, it popped from her lips. I'm like, ugh, so bad, all the writing. And he says, yeah, Jim. My real name is Jamie, but I go by Jim. I like it better. And she says, asked him, well, don't you like to be called by your given name? And she says, among her people, a man's name is very sacred. It's given by his father to remind him of who he is or who he should become. And he said, yeah, we do that too. Jamie's my grandfather's name. And she asks him, well, like, was he a great man? He says, yeah, I guess so. He's a stake president, which is like the leader of a group of congregations. So it's kind of a big deal locally. But he says, but also where I'm from, there are a lot of nerds named Jamie too. And she's like, nerds? And he's like, and so he tries to give her an example of like, well, how would you like it if your uncle were named Amalickiah instead of Tianka? You'd rather call him something else, right? And she's like, no, Tianka was this other great person, and that's the person that my uncle is trying to become. So he's like, oh wait. So then to impress her, he becomes more okay with his actual name magically because cute girls can do that. So yeah, there's your romance. Oh, and also at the end, just
That's a
before
romance.
towards the
That's a
end,
romance. Isn't
this is
it?
oh yeah. So and that's another one of the funny parts. Like later on, as Jim's about to go with Tiancum to fight against the Lamanites and work as their translator, this is the last time that he's gonna see her, and so he's like,
Mhm.
oh no, should I kiss her? And she kind of like closes her eyes, leans forward a bit, and he's like freaking out because one, he
Is
doesn't
this
know
a dream?
he's
Is
never
this still a
kissed.
dream?
No, this is the
Oh,
real
this
part.
is
This is
real.
the
Okay,
reality
okay.
part.
Just
Yeah.
want to make sure.
This isn't his imagination. Like this girl actually wants him to kiss her. And he decides not to. And the excuse that he gives is because he doesn't want like his family in the future, like not just his current life family, but like his kids or his grandkids to look down on him for doing something that he shouldn't morally.
I
Again, the stupid
I'm
purity culture attitude that they
like,
put on us, he has that stuck in his head. And that's why he doesn't kiss this girl. He ends up changing her mind later,
okay,
and
okay.
he's like, only an idiot wouldn't kiss her. But yeah, the first excuse is
I'm like
dumb.
at 13, I can kind of get it. It's awkward and weird. Like I get it, like I understand now without even without the purity culture shit. It's just weird. But they had to make this a plot point.
I know. Yeah,
So
that's as steamy as it gets. Like even Tiancum and his wife, like you don't see anything super cute with them. Like they kiss, they hug, that's it. There's nothing with them. So
I have a question. Like this is like a side note. You said that so in the Mormon church, you can't date until you're 16 years old. Is it similar to courting and like the evangelical, like extreme Baptist sort of route, or is it more like, that you can go to the movies, you can do these sort of things, but you can hold hands and maybe kiss, but that's it. Like you can't do anything that is overtly sexual. Like I'm just, again, I have questions.
oh yeah.
Because I
So
wasn't like I have friends when I was growing up that were Mormon, but like I was Catholic. I didn't infiltrate their world. And I was casual Catholic. So I'm curious, especially
it's
also for people that don't really know a lot about, Mormon culture and the religious practices, because you brought it up within the story. So now I have to ask questions.
right. Yeah, so it's very similar. Like you also are not allowed to go steady dating. So like you're not allowed to declare yourself boyfriend girlfriend or boyfriend. Well, you shouldn't be boyfriend boyfriend or girlfriend girlfriend because it's wrong to be gay in the first place. But different different episode. But yeah, so you could date, like you could go on a date with someone, but don't let it get too serious.
What's that
Because
mean?
yeah, that's the other fun part. So,
Like if
and
you
if
touch a
you
titty, is that serious? I want to know.
absolutely,
I want to know
that's an
the
absolute no.
level.
Like, and if you're going to give a kiss, like make it very, 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 very sweet.
Like
Like, don't
chase,
kiss.
like
Yeah, like don't kiss someone the way you wouldn't kiss your mom, kind of thing. Like, I don't know.
well.
It's
So how?
odd.
Okay. So again, we're doing this bunch of weird purity culture stuff. Um. So if you're not supposed to kiss them like you would in your mom, like wouldn't like that's a message that like you have to treat your partner kind of like your mother, which like that's the message. If you don't kiss, like, because it's supposed to have like you're supposed to have some kind of sexual attraction to this person, and they're trying to moderate it, and like it just like screams of like very, very misogynistic and bad ideas. Like I know that's the point, but still,
Yeah,
like like I can imagine, especially being like a young man, like confusing you, because obviously you don't want to be sexually attracted to your mother, but if you're sexually attracted to like a girl, you're like in your age group that you may want to go to the movies with and maybe make out with, or even like
yeah,
kiss, but like what is that line? Because like, does your mom kiss you on the cheek? Okay, like, but I want to kiss this girl on the mouth. Like it gets into this weird sort of what's okay, what's not okay, and no wonder people have spend years in therapy working out sexual trauma.
yeah.
Like,
And it could possibly be one of those things that these days the church has gotten a little bit more lax on.
mhm,
Because when I was a teenager, there was this pamphlet called For the Strength of the Youth. And
mhm.
every 30 or so years ago, it gets modified a tiny bit. Um, the one that when I was a teenager in like late 90s, early 2000s,
Mm.
it was very strict. Like girls could have one ear piercing on each ear, boys no jewelry, girls very little makeup, boys no makeup. Um, Same with tattoos. Nobody should have tattoos. No tattoos, nothing like that. Now they're basically saying tattoos are okay. Just make sure it's, what is your tattoo about? And they had to do that because culturally, they also have a lot of people where their local culture, tattoos are a big deal, like in the Polynesian Islands for a lot of times. And so they would have people thinking they weren't worthy to go to the temple because they already had this tattoo, but this tattoo had more meaning in their local immediate culture than the church. So now you're seeing people get a lot of like Mormon specific tattoos and the church is okay with it. It's really freaking weird. So there might also be some minor changes on the purity culture end, but this pamphlet nowadays does say talk with your parents for guidance, which Mormonese, that's saying your parents have the ultimate say on what you should be doing. And a lot of these parents grew up with the standards that I was grown up with.
Right.
So there are some teenagers that their parents are going to put the old rules on their kids, even though the church is more lax overall. So it's really weird. But when I think about it, I can show you some examples. They're fantastic.
Somebody asked, what on earth is a Mormon specific tattoo? And I want to know this as well.
Like, for example, I have seen at least one person who got a tattoo of the statue of Moroni, the angel Moroni, the thing that's on top of the temples.
Yeah, look.
They have that on their arm. Like, it's super funny. So stuff like that.
Just asking, how does the Mormon church like do apologetics for people to get tattoo, like Mormon specific tattoos? Like what was their explanation for that?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure in the Book of Mormon, like before, the late, 20th century, early like I am sure that in the past, like 10 to 15 years, that this was not a conversation that was going on. But now it's like, okay, well, we have to adapt to the Utes.
Okay, so let's see here. On the church's site itself, what it says, can Mormons have tattoos? Let's see. They are counseled by church leaders not to tattoo their bodies, as their body is considered a temple and a gift from God. BS, all of this divine stuff, body is a temple, yeah. However, and then it says there are many Latter-day Saints who acquire tattoos prior to becoming members of the church, yet they are able to regularly participate. Church members believe God loves all of his children, regardless of what they look like. Previously existing tattoos will not prevent one from serving his church and receiving all of God's blessings. That's the fun part about this church, is they like to do some of the details and some of the rules on some areas, but put like other areas, it's not a big deal here. There's so much of depending on what area you're in,
I know that I'm taking you off on tangents. So, okay. So for the next 10 minutes before we move into Q&A, like finish up the weird Mormon fan fiction.
Yes.
And then in 10 minutes, we'll move to Q&A. Cause I am sorry. You keep mentioning stuff in my ADHD brain is like, I want to know about this. So let's finish up the weird TNA stuff. And then Q&A, not TNA. That's a different show.
TNA is a different.
That's a different show, everybody.
Well, speaking of TNA, we do have some weapons about to come out from under the ring. Wrestling joke. I hope someone gets that. But so one of the fun things about reading this book, now that I'm out of the church, no longer a believer, no longer drinking the Kool-Aid, and have a bit more understanding historically and some of the anachronisms that are in the Book of Mormon, every now and then there was some moment that something would stand out to me. And I would like stop, take a picture of that page to kind of look into later. So one of those moments Of course, it deals with armies and captains and the military in general. So when Jim and Garth first see Tiakum, he has like they're kind of stopped in camping for a second, and uh, they're talking about like one of them's bragging about how Tiakum stopped a flight of people who were trying to escape uh, on the Lamanites military end. Uh, and so he talks about he's battling all these guys and there's this perilous duel involving steel swords. And Jim asks why Tiakum is the only one that has a metal sword. And he explains that metal is very precious, and most soldiers' sword is just a club with obsidian blades. So this got me kind of. I stopped here because one of the anachronisms that I learned about is this idea that so many characters in the Book of Mormon have steel swords or like other kinds of military tools that didn't actually exist back then. So, for example, I went and looked this one up just out of curiosity. Obsidian blades were pretty common back then in Mesoamerica, so that made sense. This is probably one of those moments where the author went to a current historian, asked for him additional details on what blades sometimes might have been made with. And that's probably where he got the idea of these clubs with obsidian blades, either in them or attached or something like that. But the steel swords that the higher levels in the military had, that wasn't a thing. Does not exist. And one of the apologetics in that is they'll claim, oh no, steel totally was a thing that was going on around the world, which this is true, but a lot of other cultures in Europe and Asia, they did have refineries to create steel. They had built the massive facilities to do this. And they also had easy access to nearby deposits of the metals that you turn into steel when you combine them. But this is not the case in South or North America, which is where this story takes place. That's one of the big claims of the Book of Mormon is these were people that started from Jerusalem in one area and came across the ocean and landed in the Americas in somewhere. So most of the Book of Mormon takes place in the North or South American continents in some area. So that's where this becomes a problem. You don't have evidence of these refineries in these continents like you do in the other parts of the world where steel did exist. You
You mean they
also
made it up?
don't.
They made it up?
The Smith made it up. And Joe was familiar with other cultures, and he also lived in a time in the mid 1800s where steel was common. So he thought when he saw a history book that he was being taught through, that these people in these ancient times had steel. That's where he got this idea that, oh, obviously Native American, like ancient American people, they would have had steel. So that's why he puts it in the Book of Mormon. And that's one of those times where this author gets a bit lazy and doesn't check with the historians on steel weapons. He just gets this idea that these particular weapons were kept for higher levels of the military, and then the regular common soldier had a more basic weapon, and that's when he went to the historian to get the idea for obsidian. So that was just one of those little moments where you have to do a stop, double check the facts to understand, like, oh, this is not historical fiction. This is a guy who was told some of the ideas and is kind of doing some digging, but he's also got the blinders on where if he goes and researches the wrong thing, it's going to shatter his testimony and he'll end up leaving the church and then he'll become horrible. And so that's what he's trying to avoid. He's using the Book of Mormon first, and then he's using historians second as a resource. So it makes for some really interesting moments.
So is not another anachronism that the battles were in horse-drawn vehicles, and there were no horses in the New World until the Europeans brought them over.
Yeah, especially further in the end, towards the end of the books. And that was one thing everything here, nobody was on horseback. There were some animals, but they were smaller, and everybody was walking or pulling a cart. There weren't like horses helping them out with anything in the whole book, which was
What did
which
he
was
write
impressive.
this?
89.
So he had access to the actual information of, you know, what we had at that time of historical events and things that were part of the United States when he's putting the story forth that he could actually check on.
Yeah, so it
There's
sounds
one
like he went to the
thing-
actual historians on that one and said, okay, I'm not going to talk about horses.
Right, exactly, because that's what it sounds like. It sounds like he pick and choose
Yeah.
whatever fit his narrative, like religion does.
So there's another thing also to keep in mind as far as the cultural environment of the time.
Mhm.
I'm doing some quick scanning. So at the time, there were people who worked for like BYU, Brigham Young University, the church's big school. And there were people that were in the ancient studies and archaeology and history courses, like professors, who were doing some research and finding things that were running counter to the church's teachings, to the Book of Mormon, stuff like that. And when they published things that ran counter to the church, they got excommunicated. They were kicked out. So
that sounds on brand.
yeah, so even at times, if he did go to scholars at like BYU, which would be he did often, there were things that they didn't feel comfortable telling him. So they also were having these blinders on and cognitive dissonance that they were fighting back. And so yeah, they might have also given him some inaccurate details that he put in the book.
Is he still part of the church?
I think he is. I'm pretty sure. Let's see, Chris Heimerdinger. I think he's still writing. Yeah. Let's see.
Yeah,
He's on Facebook.
The article on these stories leaves it open as to whether there's going to be another one. He's still working on it. Apparently, it keeps getting delayed.
Oh, CES letter. Okay.
Oh, did you find the
saying that
CES letter?
He's not.
Wait, how'd you get to the CES later? Oh yeah, no, he definitely is. As of a few years ago, he's got like things of the church, like 2021. He's still like posting about church only stuff. I think he's gone to another website, like let's see, he's on Twitter.
What is the CES letter?
So the CES letter, I haven't read it yet, but it was put together by a guy who has church education system source, something like that. But so the CES team, department, group,
I'm putting a
they're in
link for it in
charge
the
of
chat.
yeah, they're in charge of all the educational material that goes out from the church, primarily to like seminaries, which are like high school students and college students level.
So like in George Orwell's 1984, that would be the Ministry of Truth.
Yeah, so he had a bunch of questions on things that he was running into, and all of these issues that he was noticing. So he put together this letter detailing all of these items and sent it to the CES asking for clarification. And it ended up getting him excommunicated. So, and it wasn't just questions, it was, he put resources on where he found these answers. And like, he cited his sources. He did. Yes. It's a whole ton of fact checking this guy did and asked for their response. Like, and he wanted them to explain in a way that he could keep his faith, and he got excommunicated instead. And this is now a thing. This letter is now something he's put out, And people get recommended to go read this as a way to get them out of the church. And it's pretty effective. So it's something I'm going to read, but there's probably quite a few pieces of it that have been part of why I've left. I've just come across them a different way, or something personal has showed up and I've gotten to similar conclusions. But it is something that I want to do for my deconstruction, because I want to find all the things that I've been told that aren't correct and get them broken down so that I'm not stumbling over them.
This might be a good idea for your next talk.
I wonder, we should have someone do this. I wonder if we could get him specifically to talk about the CES letter.
All right, you and I will have to do a post-talk
Yes.
Slack conversation about continual Mormon talks. Okay, so I know we kind of got a little bit side railed from the fan fiction, but there was some really fascinating things that I had to know about, and now we have to move to Q&A.
Perfect.
Also,
Let's do it.
if you want to continue more of this conversation, I know Steph will be in the hangout. So,
For
after we do
hours.
Q&A for hours. Okay, we're going to move to Q&A. Rob, go ahead and ask a question for Q&A. You get to start.
Okay, I can do that. Let's see. The first one asked in the evening was, so if the LDS leadership are trying to walk back the contents of the Book of Mormon, does that mean that things like, quote, submarines that are tight as a drum, unquote, may not be factual? I think that was a facetious question.
I'm waiting for them to get to the point where they just say it's all fiction. And I'm really waiting to see how they excuse that.
Do you think they could ever do that?
It's
Well, the Catholic Church has done it, right? Because until some point in history, the Old Testament was true. Adam and Eve were real. There is no evolution.
Yeah.
And now they're okay with like, no, the Old Testament is just fiction.
It's all metaphor.
Yeah, it's all metaphor. But
They're-
somehow that did change in that church quite drastically. So interesting. That could happen, I
and
guess.
it's definitely happening now. Like, I think I saw recently there was a poll where only 50% of members believed that the Book of Mormon is a literal history.
Okay.
So you've already got a lot of people that are more nuanced on it,
Interesting.
but you've got people who are totally like, absolutely, it's totally still historic. Joseph Smith said so, and they're looking at the current leaders as apostate for having that stance.
Wow.
Like, yeah, like when I mentioned that they changed the wording on the layman the descendants of the Lamanites are all from the Layman, like all Native Americans are from the Lamanites, to there are descendants of Lamanites among the Native Americans.
When you say they changed the wording, does that mean they actually edited the Book of
Yeah.
Mormon?
When they did the around
So
2006, when they did the new printed edition,
Ooh.
when they had it republished, because they're constantly having to make new copies, they also go back and edit every now and then. I think on just one aspect, I saw hundreds of thousands of edits since it was first put together back in late 1830s. So yeah, it's been really fascinating.
There's been
but
5,000 changes to the Book of
tons.
Mormon.
Oh,
Jeez.
just on one piece. Like, even just if you go because the first time
So
when they
I'm
were
just going to
printing
post
out,
it in the chat.
yeah, there was a really fascinating link that I found. One of the apologists went back and counted all of the changes, and just on the first manuscript, Joseph Smith never bothered to put punctuation, paragraphs, nothing. It
Because he
was
was
all
a
like a
dum-dum.
giant one run-on sentence. And so when they were going to publish it first, the typesetter had to go back and just add all of this extra stuff. So just in those edits, that's over 105,000 different pieces. That doesn't even count the word changes, the definition changes, the spelling errors that make one word mean something totally different. It's crazy. So yeah, and then you get the the big changes where they're trying to say that it was never white and delightsome, it was pure and delightsome. And oh, it wasn't skin
Oh, that's a big
like a
change.
human skin, it was an animal skin that they wore over. Yeah, all of those different nonsense changes. So it's nuts.
I love the fact that Joseph Smith wrote a Bible fan fiction, and then additional people had to come along and correct his own fan fiction.
Right, that comes up a lot in the
For his
Help
Bible
Letter.
fan fiction.
Yeah, I actually like the New Testament is fan fiction of the Old Testament, and as is Islam.
It is, yeah.
And then the LDS comes along and makes fan fiction of the New and the Old Testament. Yeah.
Listen, I have read better supernatural fan fiction than I have read of
Right?
Catholic texts. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's wild. So, okay, I'm gonna ask another question because I gotta keep the show on the road. Okay, so was the author sanctioned or canceled for doing this book or writing the book?
Oh, he was totally allowed to. In fact, there's this bookseller run by the church called Siegel Books, and they're only selling like books and music and clothing and other things like that made by members. So yeah, that's why it was so crazy. Like growing up in Utah, there was a market, and the church loved like that there was a market to the point where they just let it go. There was, I don't know how much well, yeah, and even these authors would only work with true believing Mormons as editors and publishers. And yeah, Deseret Book is another big one. Thanks, Margaret. I'm glad I met you, Margaret. I'm so excited to not be the only one. But yeah, it's a big thing. Like, in fact, one of the firesides that I went to as a teenager, this author was the speaker. So it was held at the church. And this is how geeky I was. I was so excited. I took all the copies of the books that I had and also grabbed my grandma's so that we could get our books all signed. So yeah, we have signed copies of these books. I got rid of most of mine, but I'm pretty sure my grandma still has hers.
You should have sold them on eBay. You probably spent some money.
See how much they go.
So, okay, like to be fair, for all of us that bought into our religions, like I met a few people that wrote like paganism books about like witchcraft and stuff that I was super excited to meet. So I understand that, and I applaud it, and also that you were like, you know what, I was in that mindset. It's okay. Like you own it. You just be like, I was in a different place at that time. Own it.
Oh yeah. No, I made a point of making friends with teenage me and little kid me so that I could
make friends.
Yeah, that way you're less likely to be yelling at yourself and mad at yourself for what you believed and because that wasn't on you. That was, you got manipulated, you got lied to, you got indoctrinated from the start and didn't stand a chance. So that's not on you. So like I joke around with teenage me, be like, oh my gosh, can you believe that we read this stuff? And we laugh like in my head. That's what reading this book has been like for me, is just trash talking with teenage me like we're buddies. And I don't get mad at her. I just, this is absolutely ridiculous. Oh, that's so cringy. Like we sit and hang out. It's been fun.
Well, Maya Angelou said, like, forgive yourself for the things that you did not know before you learned them.
Yeah, there's another saying, like people put it on t-shirts and bumper stickers, and it says, forgive me what I said when I was Mormon.
Like, I'm always like, well, all of us that have been Catholic, like, we'll always be recovering Catholic. Like, I always say that, like, the guilt makes it fun.
I use past tense.
All right, we're going to do 2 more questions and then we have to wrap up and then we're going to go to the hangout. So Rob, go next.
So someone wanted to know from your previous talk, correct me if I'm wrong, it says, I understand that Mormons believe that there are many levels of heaven with its own gods. I don't know if that's right, but Jesus is one of the lower level ones. I don't know if that means Jesus is in one of the lower level ones. So would it be fair to say that Mormonism is polytheistic rather than monotheistic?
So yeah, as far as how we treat the Trinity, it's all 3 of them are individual. We actually there it goes. Mormons actually refer to it as the Godhead, as kind of like a group title. So you've got God, which is the Heavenly Father, and then you've got Jesus, and then you've got the Holy Ghost. They're 3 individuals. God has a physical body, and now so does Jesus. The Holy Ghost does not. We don't know why.
Wait. Well, this is new. So where are these
Crack it up.
where are these physical bodies of the God hanging? Like they're not on
So-
Mount Olympus. So like where I don't
I
understand.
thought they were all living on the planet Coda.
So that goes back to Joseph Smith's time. He had supposedly a prophecy where he was told, it was revealed to him as quotes, that as we are, so once was God. As God is, so will we be. So that's one of the big driving doctrines of Mormonism. These days, it's one other thing the church is trying to distance itself again. And a lot of this distancing, the reason that they're doing it is because they're hemorrhaging members so badly. And they're trying to appeal to other Christian groups where people in those other groups are getting tired of that church. So they're trying to be more attractive to Christians in general. So they're trying to distance the really unique Mormon stuff that makes us so freaking weird, which is sad because they always told us, don't try to be like the cool kids because that's worldly. And now they're trying to be like the other cool kids. And it's just the funniest thing. Like, it's a little sad that they're no longer embracing their weirdness. Like, I've learned to love my weirdness. It's kind of sad that they can't.
Like I do appreciate Mormons for the weirdness. Like because it's a trip.
Especially once you're out of it or once you're learning about it and you're not worried about the cognitive dissonance.
Right. Once you're just like,
it's
okay,
fascinating.
It is fascinating. Well, because in the Catholic Church, it's been around for like ever, so everybody's just kind of like, okay, yeah, it's like it's been around since Jesus. So everybody's like, yeah, okay, fine. But when like we're sort of, especially if you're a Westerner, you live in the United States, these American-born religions, because like Mormonism is like what, only 180 years old
it'll be mid-30s, it'll be 200. So it's
okay,
like
so it's almost 200
ish right now.
Which is
really
I want to remind people, like 2.5 of your grandparents. These are your like that's all it is. It is your grandparents, your great grandparents, grandparents, and and especially if you have a special grandparent that is just like holding on through sheer will.
Yep.
It's not that long. 200 years is not that long ago. And
it's really not.
Yeah. And I think people, those of us that live in this generation, as you get older, you're like, oh, that's not that long ago. It's weird because like if you think about World War II, which is 80 years ago, let's just go back another 120, you get the Mormon Church. So
yeah, like it's super wild, and my dad's side, we've got family like right at the very beginning, like 1837 is when my dad's family got converted. So yeah, it's really not that long. Like there's only so few generations that you can fit in that time frame. But
and also too, it sounds like the Mormon Church is doing, the Catholic Church is doing, is trying to adapt to the time change and like modern sensibilities. Like, well, I I don't want to be mean to gay people.
It's also backfiring though, because
Yeah.
with all of these changes, they're losing a lot of the members who are the diehard, like they've been believing all of these other doctrines for so
Oh, yeah.
long. And so they're losing them. And they're not all believing that these changes are coming from God. They're like, no, they're looking at these leaders as apostate. And
So
which is
where
fascinating because it's
are they
causing more
going?
branches.
Where are they going?
Where
Because I understand there's different versions of Mormonism. Some are more fundamentalist. So are they going
yeah,
those places?
I don't know. I haven't talked with too many uh Mormons that are like hardcore believers and are going to different sects or making their own. The ones I'm more in contact with are like the Exmos or the people who are physically in, mentally out, and are just trying to survive and get by until they can officially leave.
Mhm.
Some of them are just waiting for their family to leave with them. So
Is,
but
is one of the sects
it's
called
nuts.
fundamentalist LDS, something like that?
Yeah, and so the FLDS,
Yeah.
they're about as old as they're one of the branches when Joseph Smith died. They're one of the branches that started off that end.
Okay.
Their group started because when polygamy was going on, uh, the church was told, get rid of polygamy and all of that, and because otherwise Utah couldn't become a state. That was all that drama that it was around. And the FLDS church, the main reason that they branched off and became their own thing was because they wanted to keep polygamy. And the church was saying, no, we can't keep doing this. It's no longer a thing. So that's the main difference. But when you compare the FLDS church to the original one when Joseph Smith was around, they're identical. And so many people who are in the mainstream LDS church, uh, they don't want to admit that. They don't want to believe that because then
Why?
they have to realize that Joseph Smith was just like Warren Jeffs.
Oh, so he was also a pedophile and terrible
yeah.
person. Okay,
Absolutely.
that makes sense.
Yeah, married underage teenagers, like, and the church, one of the
A
apologetics,
gross human being. A gross
absolutely
human
scumbag,
being.
absolute scumbag. And not just when it came to like the way that he was trying to coerce and force young girls and married women and pregnant women to marry him as well. There was also all of the horrible things he did financially to people, like tons of stuff. The people he tried to have assassinated because they ticked him off, all sorts of nonsense. But yeah, Joseph Smith and Warren Jeffs are virtually the same person. And they don't want to understand that because we're taught that Joseph Smith is a very righteous man and totally different than that. So that's that cognitive dissonance. And if you still have your blinders up, you're not letting yourself believe that. But yeah, those two identical. The three kingdom thing, and so Jesus is in the highest of the three kingdoms. Like he's the one, he's way there. The people who are in the lowest of the kingdom, that's actually Hitler, and I'm not even going to be able to be allowed there. I get to go to outer darkness, which is the version Mormon of hell that very few people relatively will be able to go to. You really have to screw up to get to outer darkness.
Or basically just
What's
leave
outer
the church.
darkness? So is outer darkness hell?
Basically, yeah.
Okay, that's hell. Okay.
Yeah.
So is that where you have to go as an atheist and apostate now?
Yep. Since I knew about the truth and the gospel and was baptized into the church and made all those covenants, because I officially left and no longer believe, that's where I'm going. And that's where the devil and all of his followers and
you're gonna be hanging out with
demons.
Me then.
Yeah, I get to go hang out with
me
all
and
the demons.
Rob
It'll be
and
great. We'll have a heavy metal band. It'll be awesome.
Nikki and Cara and all our wonderful, like RfR people. We're all going to hang out in outer darkness, which sounds very metal.
It does, right? Yeah, celestial, telestial, and
did anybody ever make a band, the Outer Darkness band? That would be a fantastic band.
Oh my God, yes.
I know there's a candle.
Oh.
There's a candle company called the Ex-Mormon Candle Company.
Are they called
And
outer darkness? I hope so.
they have a candle that they've called Outer Darkness that they've made.
I'm not
And
Mormon, but I want that candle.
they're fantastic. They have a great sense of humor, but their slogan is lighting up outer darkness. And it's so fun.
I'm
I
fine.
love them.
I'm okay with that. It's fine. Like, I just want the outer darkness candle. Like, and my husband's a death metal, aficionado and musician. So I'll be like, you need to make an outer darkness, like,
I want to see it.
song.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, why? I'm like, it's for my Mormon people. So, okay. So we're going to move into wrapping this stuff up because we go on tangents on this wonderful program. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for being here. Again, this could be a multi-part series. We're going to have to do another talk again.
I've got more books that I'm like, I've got 3 or 4 different ones ready to go that I can choose.
I want you to talk on weird Mormon beliefs. Like, just like go through the tier list because I have so many questions. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce our wonderful executive director, Gail Jordan, to close us out. So welcome, Gail.
Thank you, everybody. It's so good to see you all. Stephanie, once again, knocked it out of the park. What a wonderful presentation. Thank you for sharing from very personal experience. I can almost see 10-year-old Stephanie when you were talking us through all that. So thank you for sharing of your time with us. That was fantastic. Rob and Helen have done a great job describing to you the couple of things that were on my list. So I'll mention them again, but I don't have to talk about them much because they have both already explained them. May the 4th, put it on your calendar, be there or be square. It's a good time. It's everybody that's anybody. It's all your podcasters that you love, and it's everybody rowing the proverbial boat in the same direction to accomplish the goals that Recovering from Religion has to provide hope, healing, and support to folks who need that. Our fundraiser provides for our budget to help us get the word out, so to speak. We have just recently updated our entry at GuideStar that has our budget and how our finances are spent. We have received for now the 4th or 5th or 7th or 8th year in a row the Platinum Award for Accountability and Transparency. So if you want to see the detail of how Recovering from Religion spends your $4 a month, as Helen has described, you can see it at GuideStar. We're very proud of that award, that Platinum Award. It's because of the hard work of our volunteers that we're able to do that. We've experienced growth every year, all the good stuff from GuideStar, so go see that. I did want to mention too, Daryl and I are going to be in the Washington, D.C. area 1st of March. And if anybody is in the area and can hang out with us, we're going to have a little informal get-together, a location to be announced over the next couple of weeks because it's only a couple of weeks till we're there. We will let you know where that's going to be. And if you can possibly join us for an evening of a little bit of laughing and fellowship and fun times, we would love to see you there. It'll be in the DC area, location to be announced. May the 4th, put it on your calendar. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Helen and Rob, for doing this. Thank you all the behind scenes that we don't always list. We are glad that we were able to give Cara the night off. They have earned it. They very seldom miss. And we were glad that they were able to take a little downtime. Thank you, everyone else, for coming. Please stay for the hangout, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.